This is Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. I'm your host, Chris Lenois, and today we are speaking with John Moran. He is the Democratic challenger running against Laura Sibilia for state representative in the Windham-Bennington district, which includes the towns of Dover, Wardsboro, Somerset, Searsburg, Readsboro, and Stamford. Welcome, John.
And a touch of Whitingham.
And a touch of Whitingham, that's right. Don't leave out that touch of Whitingham. Well, you would know. You were the state representative for this district for 8 years.
That's
up
correct.
Until 2014. Kind of an unfamiliar challenge, unfamiliar territory for you to be a challenger again. Are you telling candidates that you're a different candidate than you were 2 years ago?
No, I think I'm saying that one of the reasons I decided to step back in and run again was, after 8 years and having served and having been a public servant in my district, in my town for close to 30 years since I've been in Vermont, is that I think Bernie happened, and a chance to put forward some issues I think have been very important in terms of progressive legislation, in terms of economic equality, fair share for workers, public health care. So it was, it's a relatively new experience to be running again after, as a challenger, although I've been a challenger before.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, the first time I got elected, I unseated an incumbent Republican at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in this case here, well, first of all, the Bernie phenomenon, it sounds to me like you're thinking more about work unfinished from your time versus something that Laura Sibilia did not do in her 2 years as state representative for the district.
Yes and no. Yes, I do want to pick up from work unfinished because Bernie and I have, I've known Bernie for many years, and Bernie and I have very similar agendas in terms of economic fairness for workers, economic development, and universal public health. But I'm also running because I think in 2 years, some of the things that I fought for 8 years to protect, for example, small schools, local choice, local control, choice in school education, the whole education issues that were important to me for 8 years, I feel have been jeopardized in just the last 2 years by Act 46. Mm-hmm. So Act 46 is one of the major reasons that I am stepping back in.
Okay. Now, when I look at Laura's website, she makes an indirect reference to you and your campaign when she talks about special interests lobbying and funding opposition to her campaign. Obviously, you don't have any control over this, but again, getting back to Bernie and talking about money in politics and outside money in politics, is this something that you're condoning, this outside money influencing the election?
Well, when outside money, I'm not sure what you mean by outside money. The support I'm getting is from within the state, from people within the state, both within my district, but it's also to support the issues that are important to the residents of my district. As anybody knows, I was on the Labor Committee, I was a General Housing Military Affairs Committee. I've very much been a spokesman for livable wage, for fair treatment of workers, and I've worked on the legislative caucus for labor and working conditions. So my position is that people who support me by either by contributions or by just supporting me is because they agree with what I stand for. And what I stand for, especially in my district, is a fair pay for the employees. We have an industry there that expects people to perform services without paying a livable wage. Right. And even the labor union supports, they're not just supporting me because I support labor unions. Most of them support the issues that they don't have to support because their members already have them, like paid sick time, livable wage, that kind of stuff. So they are supporting workers in the state, whether they're union members or not. And they happen to be supporting what I support. It's like Bernie. I support Bernie Sanders because he happens to be fighting for the things I've been fighting for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I seeing that on her website, I did go to the campaign finance reports on the Secretary of State's website. I didn't see anything as far as a super PAC or something contributing, but you have had contributions to your campaign from outside the state, from, it seemed like, individuals in New York State and places like that.
Well, I do have a lot of contributions from my family. I mean, if you look at it, you'll see that my brothers and sisters have contributed to my campaign, and I did have contributions from the Vermont NEA. Yes, right.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the governor's race. Talk a little bit about your relationship with Phil Scott first, and what you know about him, times that you've worked with him.
I've had very little interaction with Phil Scott. He's a lieutenant governor, and he's obviously in the building when we're there, but he also is the presiding officer in the Senate, which I'm not in, so my experience with Phil Scott has been very limited. It's been pleasant when I've talked to him, but it's been very limited. Contrary, my experience with Sue Minter has been extensive. She was in the legislature when I was there, so we worked together as representatives, so I knew her then. But I especially knew if there's one person you want to think about in terms of Irene recovery, it was Sue Minter. I mean, she came down into Wardsboro and Readsboro when I was out there looking at culverts and dealing with that. There was Sue Minter. So my experience with Sue Minter, and also in the Agency of Transportation and just getting paving done through Dover and Wardsboro, which all the roads have been paved, well, since I've been in office. So my experience working with Sue Minter is she's someone who gets things done. She rises to occasion and handles crises very well.
Yeah, I should have checked her dates. I thought that maybe she finished in the legislature right as you came on, but there was overlap there.
A little overlap, yes,
okay.
there was.
Certainly a good endorsement there as far as some of the things that you feel that she could do. Any concerns about her platform when you think about things that you'd want to accomplish?
No, I think her platform is, first of all, I think she's very much on women's issues, which is very important. I mean, like, for example, I pushed very hard for a paid sick leave for women, which my opponent did not support. I pushed very hard for livable wages, which my opponent did not support. So Sue, I think, not only is a woman running, but she also stands a lot for the women's issues. One of the things I think is very important is when we look at especially equal pay, which is one of the things, equal pay for women, which is one of the things I championed in the House when I was there. So I think Sue stands very well for that. She stands for economic development. She will definitely be someone who would be very capable of creating our infrastructure, roads, bridges, and whatever, to create economy, but also create a good environment for the state of Vermont. So I'm very happy with Sue, and I wish her luck in this campaign.
Yeah. Phil Scott is running on the idea that he's willing to listen to ideas from either side of the aisle so long as they are good ideas. Most of the time he seems to be pretty moderate as far as a Republican goes. Do you think it's a huge setback if he was the governor as far as things you would want to accomplish?
Well, not if we're comparing what's happening at the national level. It's
Sorry to use that word huge to bring up the national level.
Right, yeah. It's hard to even to think anything at the state level could be what's going on at the national level, especially with the candidacy of a person who's not supportive of women's issues and what have you. Lieutenant Governor Scott has been around for a long time, and I appreciate his listening. We should always be listening, but I would think he should have more specific proposals now, because he has been around for a long time. So, I mean, I will work with who's ever the governor, but I definitely see that Sue Minter really is a preferred candidate as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, your priorities on your website, and I'll let everybody know that's johnmoranvt.com. People want to go check that out, are all under this umbrella called the Vermont Promise, which talks a lot about these economic justice issues, starting with the minimum wage. Now, we have had passage of an increased minimum wage here in the state of Vermont, getting to $10.50 by 2018, and then prorating its growth based on other factors in the Vermont economy. Is that adequate, or is that something you think needs to be ratcheted up?
Not only is it not adequate, but the proposal from the incumbent is even less adequate, because when we bring up the question of minimum wage, the incumbent said that she should let the federal government do the heavy lifting on that and let the federal government raise the minimum wage. Well, if we trusted Congress, which I'm not inclined to do, currently the minimum wage in the country is $7.25. Right now it's $9.60. So if we went with my opponent's position, we would lower the minimum wage right now over $2, and it would be a pay cut for Vermonters, the most vulnerable Vermonters. It'd be a pay cut of $5,000 a year. No, I don't think the minimum wage is sufficient now. I want it to be $15 an hour, and I introduced that a few years ago, and I will continue to push for that. We did get a compromise. We raised the minimum wage when I was in the House, but I would like to see more.
Yeah, so $15 an hour, not some gradual increase, but $15 an hour to start.
Oh no, I would see us getting there at some. I would look, at a proposal that came from Peter Galbraith when he was running in the primary. I would see by July of this coming year maybe $250 and move it up. And I would see $15 an hour by 2020. No, so I don't want to do it overnight.
Right.
And it's not because I don't think there's a lot of businesses, especially in my district, there's some very large employers who could afford to do it overnight. But I want to make this gradual to help the small businesses adjust to the process. But I think when we sit down and look at the issue, it is to me morally unacceptable to support industries in the state of Vermont by paying workers less than enough to live by. I cannot find a moral imperative that says it's okay to support a tourism or a service industry or retail industry without paying those people who create that industry enough money to live on.
Right. Well, what is it about that $15 an hour figure that you think is the right balance? Obviously, they have to make sure they can operate and stay in business. I'm thinking $15 an hour is something that a lot of urban areas right now are going to. Why do you think 15 is right for a rural state?
Well, in my district, for example, the largest employer could pay that immediately. There'd be no issue in the tourism industry, the ski lift operator, the wait staff, so that could happen. I would see the transition for the smaller businesses, and I would really be open to supplemental payment to the businesses to make the $15 an hour okay. We cannot, if I find it totally unacceptable to say because this business cannot afford $15 an hour, then its employees should live on less than they need to live on. If there has to be some adjustment, it has to be support the small businesses so they can afford to pay the persons $15 an hour. But to say that we can't afford to pay them $15 an hour is to say we're asking people to work for us at a salary less than they can live on. It makes no sense to me. It is not politically, economically, or morally right to do that. So I have no argument in being supportive. You look for Deerfield Valley, where one of the districts, major part of my district, is we put about $12 million back into the economy every year in the education tax because of the tourism industry. What I would see us doing, what I see the state doing, because this is a cash cow. This is a lot of money coming from the tourism industry into the general funds. What I would see is the general fund put some of that money back into the creators of this economy, the people who create this money, to help make it fair to the people who create the economy.
Yeah, of course, a lot of businesses might push back and say, well, if you just lower income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes in the state, people would have more spending power, just as if you raised the wages here. You talk about fair taxation on your website, wondering what you think is the formula for fair taxation.
Well, so let's go back, since we haven't really got into Act 46 yet, which I really think
I want to get into Act 46 specifically, but let's talk a little broader right now.
Let's start with property tax.
Yeah.
Part of the thing, what happens is, when we run for office, the candidates run for office, and the number one complaint we hear from our constituents is high property taxes. And so we say that we're told to do something about the property tax. But as soon as we get up into Montpelier, then we bait and switch. We don't talk about property tax, we talk about education funding, governance. I would propose, since 2/3 of the homestead property tax is already based on income sensitivity, I would propose that we end the homestead property tax. That residents will only pay property tax for the municipal. They will not pay any property tax to support education. That will come from graduated income tax.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. And besides the obviously fairness to the residential residents of our towns, is because a lot of the cost to education now isn't educational cost. It's social cost. It's cost because of poverty, because of substance abuse, because of a lot of other issues. So a lot of what the property taxpayer is bearing the burden for are for issues that come to the school that aren't necessarily educated related. And I think that belongs to the general fund, the income tax, and that's how I think we can do it.
Right. Just really quickly on the general fund and the budget just in general, $2.46 billion in the current fiscal year, $1.58 billion for schools. Think about a state the size of Vermont. Is that the right size, a $4 billion budget?
Well, it's the budget we have, and I think the state of Vermont, of course, if it would do some of the things I'm saying, like to pay correctly the people who create the economy, it would spur more economy because the 2/3 of the economy is spending. And if people had the $15 an hour, a livable wage, and $15 an hour isn't a magic word, it's a livable wage, whatever it is determined. If people would have that, that would spur the economy to create more. And if also we had economic development that rewarded creativity that we have in my district. We have a person who's created a TV film festival, which is independent film festival, and also an adventure program that brings in people into Vermont. If we would reward those people who are creative and really spur the economy, then we would create a better system for all of us. Yes, the cost is high, but we're a small state. We always have overhead. I mean,
and we always struggle to meet our revenue projections. We've had these budget shortfalls each and every year the past few years.
And one of the reasons is because people don't pay taxes because they're not being paid. In a sense, what we're doing is we're subsidizing the businesses that could afford to pay two ways. We're subsidizing them, first of all, because they're not paying a livable wage to their people. So then we have to make up the difference with social services. And so what you and I are doing is we're subsidizing those businesses which could afford to pay a livable wage, because then if they don't, we have to pay for the services, whether it's food stamps or whatever the process is. And second of all, we are subsidizing them because we have an economic development system which gets tax incentives for jobs created that are not livable wage jobs. So we get hit twice. We get hit, first of all, the taxpayer pays for the business to create these jobs, create this business, and then we get hit again because we have to pay for the social services that the pay doesn't give those people.
Yeah. Let's go back to Act 46, the plan to unify school districts here in the state, and you just used the term bait and switch. You use that on your website. Yeah. That's a pretty charged term. I mean, that's basically accusing them of a deliberate act here. Do you really think it was a deliberate move to tell people one thing was going to happen and then have another outcome?
Well, what I do know, and as I say, I've been in there long enough to know that every time we go around campaigning, people say, yes, we have to do something about property tax. It's too high and we have to lower property tax. And yet every time we get, we've had proposals, I've supported them. We had proposals from Jim Condon and Chris Pearson. We've had proposals to deal with the property tax, but they never really seem to go anywhere. What seems to be the agenda is then to change governance. Somehow there's an argument that if we change governance, that will solve the problem. And yet nobody who wants change of governance claims that that's going to lower the costs anyway. As a matter of fact, they say, well, raise the cost over time. So when I say bait and switch, maybe it's charged, but what I'm saying is we don't address the property tax question when we get up there and we start talking about governance, which not only is not relevant to the property tax, but it's also very destructive, I think, to communities, local control, small schools, and choice. And
you think that that's a better situation, a better structure for schools the way it currently is set up here in Vermont?
I have no argument with school districts getting together and trying to work with each other and talking to each other. I mean, we've done it. I was on a school board in Wardsboro and the school board in Dover, which Laura's on. We've talked to each other about issues, but as soon as it becomes mandatory, as soon as it starts to say, first of all, not only, I think it addressed problems that did not exist and created new ones. Because the small school is the soul of the community. And all the schools in my district are small schools, whether it's Wardsboro or Dover, whether it's Readsboro or Stamford, and even over in Whitingham. As a matter of fact, Wardsboro and Dover get some of the highest awards in the state. They're excellent schools.
But do you think they have the same opportunity as some of the bigger schools in the state when you talk about some of the programs that they might have available? I mean, are you able to deliver the same caliber of education in those small schools that a bigger school would?
Well, first of all, Dover, as I say, Dover and Wardsboro get high ratings in the state, so one of the highest ratings in the state for the quality of their education. So I think there is. But it's also, and I'm not saying you can't share resources. I'm not saying if you need to, if you have a French teacher who can teach one day in Wardsboro, the next day in Dover, and the next day up in, I have no argument with moving some of the resources around, and we have electronic processes too. But the thought of transporting students, because Laura even admitted, the incumbent even admitted that the purpose behind Act 46 was to close small schools. That was the aim of many people behind Act 46, was to close small schools. She referred to it as the Frankenstein bill when it started. But so the purpose is to close small schools. But let's look at Dover and Wardsboro, because we're both each on the board, so I was on the board. To go from Wardsboro to Dover, there's a reason there's two towns right now, Wardsboro and Dover. because of the mountain. They had to split the town in half because people could not get over the mountain in the winter to go to town meetings. So that's why those two towns exist. We're now talking about setting up a system where if you close Wardsboro, the kids would have to go over 1.5 mountains to get to the school in Dover. So the cost factor is even higher because it would add to the cost of education just to do the transport. See, some of the people behind Act 46 who live in Burlington can, just drive on a flat street down a couple blocks to go to another school. That's not the case in the rural schools here. And especially when you talk about Dover and Wardsboro, but when you get out to Stamford and Readsboro, then we're really out there in no person's land in that sense. So the need to mandate this, and what the state is saying is they're saying, we're going to let you try it your way. We have a preferred model, which means you do it our way. That's the preferred model. And if you don't do it and you try to come up with something else, then we'll do it to you. That's really the process. And the working together, schools working together to create a more effective system by sharing resources, by sharing whatever they can, I have no argument with that. And that's something that can happen, but it has to happen at a voluntary basis.
Yeah. Well, and regardless of how good our pre-K through 12 system is or is not, we definitely have a hard time right now getting students from that model to the post-secondary step here, especially in the state of Vermont. We have high graduation rates from high school, very low enrollment in colleges in state. Probably a big reason that we're having a challenge retaining young people here. When you think about that transition, what are some of your priorities in terms of making sure, because that affects the economy just as much, not having these good paying jobs and not having people trained staying in state. What would you do about post-secondary education?
Staying in state, rural states, has been an issue for 100 years or so. We're not talking about young people going to the big city and getting involved in careers in New York and Boston, whatever. That's been going on forever. Part of the problem when we address the education issue in the declining enrollment here is because, well, first of all, Vermont is the second oldest state in the Union, and it has the lowest birth rate in the nation. I think Nevada has the highest, Vermont has the lowest. So we do not support sufficiently the college education in the state in terms of funding from the legislature. We spend more on incarceration than we do on college, and that's not unacceptable. So, but we also need to again honor the creativity of the people like Philip Gilpin down in Dover and other people to create industries that can bring in people. But it has to start with the concept that everybody's work is valuable. You and I talked about who creates the economy in Vermont and who is owed the return for the investment. Who makes a commitment? Sometimes the argument is, if I create a business and I take the risk, I deserve the rewards. That's a classic, almost unregulated capitalistic attitude.
Right.
First of all, it doesn't understand that if I come in and create a business in Vermont, first of all, I'm using the resources that you and I already paid for, the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, and everything else. It's not like I'm doing this on my own. I am getting assistance from the state to do this business, and I'm also using all the infrastructures that this state created. But then I say, okay, well, I'm taking a chance with my money, I'm investing myself. You know who really invests themselves in this community? The people who take the jobs, the people who settle in the community, who take out a lease, or who pay a lease or a mortgage, put their kids in a school. They are the ones that say, we're going to take a chance, we're going to commit ourselves, and they have a right to be honored by being paid a fair salary. If the business fails, the entrepreneur just goes elsewhere with his money.
Yeah.
If the business fails, I've got my kids in the school, I've got friends, this is my neighborhood, I've got a mortgage, I've got a lease, I have made the commitment. And that's why it is only fair that I be paid at least enough to live on.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the dislogic in that?
Yeah. Before we run out of time, I wanted to get to another aspect of the Vermont Promise on johnmoranvt.com, and that has to do with health care. And certainly you're a proponent of universal health care, but right now the step you're suggesting on your website is this guaranteed primary care for all. Certainly not as costly a step as the universal health care plan, the single payer plan that Governor Shumlin abandoned. But do you still think that that's an affordable step forward for the state of Vermont, having guaranteed primary care for all people?
In due course, yes. Well, first of all, and I have to apologize to Sue Minter, because Sue Minter has a term of Vermont Promise on some educational thing. I didn't mean to steal her expression.
Okay. So sorry, Sue.
Right, Sue. So I'm not stealing your terminology.
You're right. She does have the Vermont Promise. Go
But
on.
I think I use the word Vermont Promise because the Declaration of Independence isn't the American dream, it's the American promise. And so when I say the promise, I mean, we're not just talking about a dream people have about a livable wage and a 30-year mortgage and sending your kids to school and have a better life. We're talking about a promise that has been made in this country over and over again. So that's why I use the term. I'm sorry. So
we're talking about health care and this guaranteed primary care for all, and whether that's an affordable step for the state.
I, Bernie, and a few other people are disappointed that we couldn't have moved forward better than we did in terms of health care. But I think we were just at a presentation today on the what's the term?
The all-payer model?
The all-payer model, which is a good model because in a sense, it's almost like if we could have learned from the education laws where we can learn from the all-payer model. First, if it's a model that it's a local control by the state of Vermont. So they have a deal with the government, but the government gives Vermont its local control over the model. And then it's a voluntary model. And it's a model based working on the providers of services to accept this model. And it is one of the most important steps we can make in healthcare because it goes from what we used to call what we call the fee-for-service thing, which is if I'm a healthcare provider, my income is based on how many services I provide, which is not necessarily the best way for the well-being of the state or for the well-being of my patients. This model is going to be based on the fact that I'm going to capitate the people I cover, and I'm going to make an agreement, and I have to make this agreement. I have to buy into the model. It's voluntary, that I will be paid accordingly. And what this will do is will shift my focus not from sickness, but to health. See, we have an allopathic medicine system which says, somebody gets sick, let's cure them. Let's wait till they have a serious disease and we have to have open heart surgery. This model, similar to our blueprint for health, it says, let's try to keep people healthy to start with. Especially in the area of substance abuse, psychiatric and substance abuse stuff. 40 years I've been an alcohol drug counselor. And many of the medical problems we have are caused by addiction to cigarettes, addiction to alcohol, misuse of opiate drugs and everything. If we start to have a comprehensive model that I as a doctor, I'm not looking at you as a patient with a heart disease or this disease, I'm looking at you as a total person who I want to keep healthy.
Right.
And that's the model.
Right. Well, we have that now, don't we, with the hub and spoke model and the patient-centered medical homes?
Well, some of that, but we need to do more. Ideally, I would have liked, and the governor mentioned it today, we do have an all-payer model. It's called Medicare.
Right.
And the more we could expand Medicare, the more we could make it available. Especially, one of the things we haven't talked about is, my concern is financial security for senior citizens. Yeah. Being the second oldest state in the union, we have a lot of people who are living close to the vest who have to make decisions about medicine versus food for me or food for my pet. I mean, so we really have a system where our senior citizens have to be taken care of. And many of them would be better served if Medicaid was available sooner. Because a lot of people who come into retirement, especially in Vermont, the guys in construction, the guys working on roofs, they come into retirement with a lot of aches and pains of physical work. And they're not as healthy as some people like to think. And the more coverage we can give for them, the better.
Yeah. Well, and people will have to refer to your website, johnmoranvt.com, for that, because we're unfortunately out of time here today. I know
time flies.
Half an hour goes fast, right?
Yes, it does.
Anything you want to say to the viewers at home?
Well, as I said before, the reason I'm running is because I think it's a chance for us to appreciate the dream that Bernie Sanders put forward and got such a great reception in the state of Vermont, that economic justice for all, health care for all, and a system where Vermont is a place that you really want to live, work, own a business, and retire.
John Moran, great to see you again. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. I want to remind everybody that Election Day is November 8th, but early voting is available now. Go to your town clerk's office and get a ballot if you are ready to cast your vote. And you can watch this episode of Meet the Candidates as well as other episodes on demand at BrattleboroTV.org. Thank you.